Hey, everybody, welcome to the Beverly Hills 90210 show. Both the episodes this week were not live. We're going to be pre-recorded episodes. The first one up that I'm here to talk about is this one called Every Dream Has Its Price Tag. It was recorded several months ago with Amy Spees and Noelle Parker. This is the shoplifting episode. It's really a great conversation. I think if you're not on our Patreon, you're absolutely going to enjoy it. So here is this again. It's pre-recorded. We'll be back live next week when we cover Castles in the Sand with Brooke. So that should be a lot of fun. Okay, thanks so much. And here is the episode.
Hey, Beverly Hills 90210 fans. Are you ready to dive deep? Episode by episode, storyline by storyline, character by character, as we break down the making of your favorite zip code. With your host, Pete Ferrero. Like so many special guests, and all your questions, live on the Beverly Hills 90210 show. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all right. So here we are. We are doing a special bonus episode of Every Dream Has Its Price Tag, and we are joined by Amy Spees and Noelle Parker, who was our Tiffany in that episode. Charles and I have been referring to her as the shoplifter.
And Amy's the writer, of course.
Yes, yeah. And Amy wrote this. It's good to see both of you. It's exciting to chat with you about this episode. Amy, you were just telling Noelle something before we came on. Do you want to pick up what you were saying?
Yeah, I was saying that I had not seen in full that episode since it aired. And I actually remember watching it when it aired. And it was actually the first TV hour long that I had written. I'd written movies, I'd written half hours. And so it was very much from my heart. And your character, I loved your character. I don't love all the characters I loved it. And I loved, you were fantastic. When I watched you, I mean, I always thought you were fantastic and I remembered it, but you were so great and real. And so.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was fun. That was a fun character to play. I mean, I was telling Peter that, so Charles, you go by Charles now? Because I remember you went by Chuck.
Friends call me, if you know me and you're a friend, you call me Chuck. But professionally, I've always been Charles. My wife for many years told me I didn't look like a Chuck. Chuck should be from Iowa. And I didn't feel, and my grandpa was Charlie. My high school girlfriend called me Charlie, so that wasn't going to work. So
okay.
I'm
Charles. I'm going to go with Charles because I get.
Either way, I answered anything.
So I was telling Peter that when I auditioned for that part, I mean, it was really early in the series, right? It was like the second show ever.
Second episode, yes.
Yeah.
And we produced there was a pilot and then 2 episodes.
Right. And I was super like body conscious and insecure, which is so weird for an actress to have those, qualities. But I remember that the director asked me in the audition, like, oh, would you be comfortable wearing a bikini? And I was like, no, I would not be comfortable wearing a bikini. And she was like, well, it'll be a really far away shot. Like it'll be from far away, so you won't have to worry. And I was like, all right, we'll see, whatever. We'll see how this goes. And I was like, I'll wear shorts and a bathing suit top, but no, I'm not. And, then I ended up like in wardrobe with them, like, okay, let's fit you for a bikini. And I was like, no. And so scary. And then they, I get on the set it was like one of my first days shooting. And I get on the set and it's all lit and everybody's in place. And they're like, okay, you're on the diving board. And the camera is literally like 6 inches from my body. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not a long shot. and then I was so like worried about how I looked. And the next day, were you on the set, Charles? You were on the set, weren't you?
I only have once or twice on this particular episode because it was the new part, and I'm pretty sure I was so paranoid that we would not make our days for so many reasons, and that I would be punished for it. That I would go out sometimes if I'd be called, we're way behind.
Right.
And so I saw you. I remember definitely being with you on the set.
So what I remember, and I remember it being you, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's me.
So the next day I was like, oh my God, did you see the dailies? Did you see the dailies? And you were like, oh yeah, the scene went really well. And I was like, forget the scene. How did I look? Like, how did I look in the bikini? And you said to me, you look great. You have great childbearing hips.
I didn't say that. Listen, my wife was pregnant. I had a toddler at home. It was on my mind. I said to Pete, when he said he contacted you, I said, oh God, she's going to remember what I said. I'm in trouble here. And I apologize. I'm real good at apologizing. And
it's funny, just like Pete or whatever I was like, is that a compliment? I'm not.
No, you were horrified. There was no question. What are you saying to me? I went, oh God, that's something I have to ask you though, Noelle, do you have children?
I don't. I haven't had children.
Oh well, those hips went to waste.
So I know the hips.
I also know a lot of actresses who, like the actresses on Melrose Place, which I worked on afterwards. They were, in my Mommy and Me groups, I was with a lot of actresses, and they're all aware of that. But I think really more power to the director for actually in that era even bringing it up. And it was a she. I'm not sure he would have brought that up.
He would never have brought it up. That's absolutely right, Amy.
I think Bethany
that shot of you,
right,
not with your head of this, was in the first season title sequence.
I know.
So from not wanting to do it
and from thinking it was going to be far away to that shot literally like started at my feet and the camera like went up and widened out and
intro
revealed my body, and then you guys used it right before it revealed my face. You guys used
exactly. So for years I thought it was Jenny Garth. Quite frankly, I didn't know what it was.
That's funny. Yep.
That's really funny stuff.
It was really fun.
Amy, I want to ask Amy, because you wrote this episode. Coming into 90210, this is really early. Like you said, the second episode? Do you remember coming into that world and then writing this? And what was that process like?
I totally do. I don't know about how my birthing whatevers were, but I had a 2-year-old daughter at home. And so I wasn't really used to going into an office because I had been writing screenplays. And I had a back house, and I went in I thought, Chuck was the one that hired me. I thought it was, and I was brought on for 6 months with a 6-month thing to help with the girl characters, because I had written a movie, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. And in fact, a lot of what I've written has been about teenage girls. I'm just finishing, or they're showing my first novels out. Agents Have It, are showing it. And it's about women, and memory, but it really goes into the feelings of loss and abandonment you can have as a teenager. So I thought that's why I thought your character and how you did it was so great, because it's what came across, and as Chuck knows, it was inspired by some of our situations growing up. Because even if you're in a materialistic world that is so you can sometimes you still feel the law. You don't have the basic thing. And that Walsh family, early on, they didn't know who they wanted to focus on, the network and Aaron Spelling. And so it was really they were thinking it would be very about family in the midst of all this craziness in Beverly Hills, and how the solidity of the family. Yes. Coming to it was very exciting and fun, because I like collaborating. So, yeah.
Well, Amy, a couple of things. Amy is a long time resident of Beverly Hills. She graduated from Beverly Hills High School, like myself. She's much younger than me, a whole year younger. So she. But Amy also, yes, her credit, whatever the credit is, her calling card script. Every writer has that. The one that everybody reads and then wants to take meetings, was called Too Smart for Love. And I think it was one of the best. I still remember it. I still may even have it, Amy, in my in the box.
It's so funny you remember that. That was the first. Really, that was the first script I wrote, and it was
great.
It was basically a romance comic meets action adventure kind of a thing, but it was a script. So,
and also, I should say that Amy is second generation Hollywood. Her father was a known writer of TV movies, and I'm sure a lot of other things I don't know, probably features before TV movies.
TV shows. One of the first episodes, the first year of Star Trek. You know, the whole stuff. My mother was also. I never realized this because she died, which is a lot of what inspires my loss. That focusing on that, she died when I was 24, but she has a Hitchcock credit for Hitchcock. So that she just never was very braggy.
Wow.
So
that's like Hollywood royalty right there. Yeah.
But it was very, very, very fun coming in many ways, and the exciting part of it. And we all had no idea. No idea. It was like we would kid around like, oh, are these fashions going to shape, the show? Is it even going to catch on? And because it was relatively low profile at the beginning, and I think Chuck would verify this, we had so much freedom, and we had a playwright. We had a writer from New York. We had, the guy who created it, who had written features. And I think we had someone else too. And so everybody had very different, unique styles, and we were given a lot of freedom in the first few scripts. And so it all kind of helped make it, I think, a little more original than it might.
The first 6 were very different from what happened, right? We made the change. We changed line producers, because the first season was, as you say, absolutely correctly, it was Walsh family show. I often say I produced the show, ran the show for 5 seasons, and I ran 5 different television shows because of what the focus was, what the tone was, what the expectations were. They had no expectations at this point that we would even get to our order of 12 episodes. And because of the nature of how Fox functioned at that juncture, that what we would do in the one that preceded Amy was called The Green Room. Amy's script and my next script was called One-on-One about busing in Beverly Hills around sports. Until Darren wrote the first time, which is when Brandon Walsh loses his virginity, we would finish these episodes, we would show them to the people, and their reaction was meh. Yeah, they would find out in the nature of what they were. And it came back to me, Amy and Noelle, as we're talking here, that I remember now what Aaron said about this episode, which I had forgotten completely. Because I blank a lot about what he said to me. I will, but that it was an okay episode. But why were we focusing on the guest cast? It's like, okay, you deliver this, and it was tough. When Amy says to the assembled, I wrote scripts from home in a back house. I wrote scripts from home in a back house. I mean, once in a while I'd be on a TV series, not much I had already been in the entertainment business for 12 years before I started 90210. And the 5 years, we did 6.5 years of television in 5 years. And I aged 25 years in that period of time. It was more, when you're a writer at home, you get angry about things, or, you're executive in this, but it's not so overwhelming that riding on you, what you're writing, what you do. And I know I was not emotionally prepared for it. In fact, Amy, I don't even think you would know this. When I was right before this particular situation, I was a writing producer, the Northern Exposure, and which you'd think, wow, that was great, and yet it was a very rough show, a lot of personality stuff, and I come home to my kid. I'm not temperamentally suited for this business. I really should just teach. This isn't right for me. Maybe I should have done like Juliet, go write speeches for political people. This is not right for the way I should go my life here. And so it was a tough transition, and I think we all, got through it. But this episode, to stand up, I had because the green room and this episode were not treated that respectfully by the network or the production company. And then there was Darren's really good episode. And when I wrote, I knew about those two.
Right.
Those two, I hadn't watched till about, when was it? When did we do that first 6? Like about a month ago?
Yeah, 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
And I was so happy he reached out, and we have you both here today.
I actually don't remember that. I actually remember the Fox executives calling me and saying they really loved the episode and they thought it was great. So I actually thought it was received.
Was it McDermott called?
That makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah, but I think
a little better.
Yeah, I got at the time that was very well received. But
well, it was a wonderful script. They would call, but they were talking to me about always different stuff, stuff that I wasn't prepared for.
The other thing that happened is that with as we got closer, I'd say after 5 or 6, they started realizing that people were paying attention.
Right.
They started getting into it, and they started. They started exerting their influence and having opinions that we weren't just kind of, let's try this.
Right, we had to be a little more. Right.
Yeah, the episode Chuck was talking about, episode 7, it was they still wanted it to be the parents at the beginning. And so she gets a job because I know the actress was desperate to have a job on the show. And I had known her before. We were in a Mommy and Me group together, ironically. And so so we had her getting a job, but then they didn't want her to have the job at the end because now that she got, and we all said, but they wanted it, and that's how they ended up doing it. I think I forget, and so then it became just a little more. I guess I don't know if it was more like a traditional, like a show, but it was just more like it wasn't the very early exciting stuff.
Right.
You could try crazy.
And you see it in here. You see it in here with the in this particular episode. With when Brandon goes out to look for his job, and we use Town Without Pity.
I love that, by the way. I forgot.
Yeah, you remember when we came up with that?
I love that. Yeah, I had totally forgotten.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, in that subplot, I think I must have had mentioned to Amy, because she took and ran with it.
Yeah.
That when I got out of high school, all my friends were, pretty much staying in state colleges, and they were traveling in Europe. And I was totally guilty because I was going to a school that's tuition was about $1,000. I was going to University of Wisconsin in Madison. So I needed to get a job in Los Angeles. And I went into the food court at the Century City, which was brand new.
Right.
And now it's an iconic place. It was brand new, and it was in our backyard at Beverly Hills High School. And I went in and asked for a job application. And the person said, "You don't want to, what are you doing? You're not going to work here." Because you looked around, there was not one Caucasian working there on any of the food stalls. Maybe there weren't as many as there were 8 or 10. So I reminded that to Amy. And, Amy, one of the things that our third person in this endeavor here is Larry Mullen, who I don't think you probably know personally. He came in the 4th season. We became really close friends. Yeah, he's at Luke's funeral. At Luke's funeral, yeah. Because Amy was there with Darren and I was there with Larry, and we and he has not known any of these first season episodes. And what he says, I think, amplifies what Amy says, and what you feel in this particular episode is that we were saying things politically that nobody else was saying,
True.
But also how true it was, the feeling of those first 6 to actually living in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
That it feels like maybe not the Beverly Hills that existed in 1990 while we were making the show, but the Beverly Hills that Amy and I remember from the 70s. And that was a glory era when she and I went to high school.
Well, because it was it was a different era. But also the other thing that I thought about two things with that. I thought, first of all, the whole part, which wasn't the part you were directly in, Noelle, but the part where Cindy gets a maid, that was something I was told to do. Like, I don't know. And then I thought, and I said, well, I'll turn it into she doesn't want it. You know, she doesn't want it and she feels uncomfortable with it. But, you know, if that were done today, I would be allowed to do it in a much, it would have been a really good additional little, with a couple of lines to make it really blend in with everybody else's story there, with Noelle's story as Tiffany and with, you know, the Jason story too. And I think that, so I thought that was okay, but I thought together, and the stuff you're talking about, we talked about creating a place, you know, and the peach pit, and Chuck had loved the apple pan.
Right.
My belly will show you that's the truth.
Loved it. And for people not in LA, that's a place on Pico. I think it still exists.
Yeah, we went
during COVID, and I had friends at college. One of the very few people I knew that was married when they got to college. And they called each other Peach, and then they had a baby, and they called her Peach Pit. So I sort of took the combination of Chuck's love of the apple pan as a kind of a normal hangout place, which it was, and then the Peach Pit, and it was therefore it was the Peach Pit.
It was immediate, you know. Yeah, Peach Pit. Not apple candy, because we wanted to use apple pan and they wouldn't let us. So it was, well, we got to fictionalize it. That's how little we knew when we were starting the show. Oh, sure, they'll let us use the name and they'll let us film there. No.
And I wrote this whole thing in that episode of, you know, my vision of having a dream, Brenda having a dream, and Les Miserables. And they did the first production meeting. They said, I remember, and they said, oh my God, do you know how much this is going to cost? Do you know how many days this is? And I said, oh yeah, I just sort of thought it was aspirational. I mean, I didn't know. That's what I really learned the first, because on Girls Just Want to Have Fun, there were the dancings, but they did it, you know. So
yeah, it was a movie. They had to do it.
Noelle, I want to go to Noelle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, how about you coming into this? You know, auditioning. What was the process like for you? Do you remember how you got into all of the 90210 world?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was an audition. I was, you know, going on many auditions all the time, and you know, it's funny hearing you guys talk about it, because I do remember there being this sort of like, you know, laissez-faire, like there, it wasn't like, this is 90210 and like, you know, Shannon and everybody and weren't stars yet, you know. And it was, so there was a sort of it was a lot of fun on the set, you know, for me. There was like it was pretty relaxed, you know. I remember being very sure that Shannon was going to be the star of the show, though, like would be with her in like hair and makeup. I was like, whoa, that is like, that's what an actress, I guess, like behaves like, you know. And I mean, I've had my agent, you know, I've gotten jobs where my agent was like, you know, you have to ask for more in your contract, you know. And I was like, I'm not a diva, but it was really like, it was really fun, you know. There was a lot of like, it was a light environment. And what you guys were talking about before, like the way that the episode starts, literally, I think the mother is digging in the garden, and like, I mean, kind of like Charles, what you were saying, like it did become a completely different show, you know. It was definitely focused on, you know, I was sort of this bad girl influence on, you know, they were just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and moving to Beverly Hills and just like, you know, Joe Normal family. And yeah, I was, you know, playing this sort of like darker aspect of, you know, the dark side of, I guess really, you know, just kind of Hollywood, like what, you know, that there's this glitter and there's this beauty and there's this, you know, what everybody sees. And then underneath it, there's a lot of pain and a lot of loneliness. And, you know, that character really, I mean, that was a really fun character for me to play, because I got to really do all that, being really flippant and being really, materialistic and not caring. And then, it really was a great arc that, in the end, having that last scene with the mother where she comes and realizes that, oh, you're like all alone, and so that idea of them coming and looking at, Beverly Hills and the rich people and all of that, and maybe wanting to be more like that, and seeing that, in fact, those people are lacking, the goodness and the wholesomeness that their family, came with and already had,
Yeah. Stuff.
Yep.
I just want to address the thing about the maid just for 1 second, because that came from me. I grew up with a housekeeper, from the moment we moved to Beverly Hills. And so it was there. And most of my friends, with the exception of Jeffrey White, all had housekeepers.
Who was the producer on the show, by the way?
He was the line producer. Yeah. My close oldest friend. And I put him into something that was not fair for him, me, or anybody else. But nonetheless, but we remained still the closest of friends. But it was, so I had that, and I thought there was a lot of ways to do stories with that relationship. And we ended up being able to do 2. One with a girl who wanted to come into Beverly Hills called East Side Story. And I guess that was the main one. And then about the idea of the illegals, what stuff was going on with that community. But Mr. Spelling did not care. It was the wrong look. He didn't want it. They shouldn't have a housekeeper. And like Amy says, if they tell you to do this enough, that you're going to do it. There's some certain things I learned to push back on, but something like that you can't push back on. Like the fault was not Aaron Spelling. If you don't like the idea, the fault was Charles. That was my.
No. I don't think it was. I don't think it was necessarily a bad idea to do it, but I think it was good to do it in the way that it's a reality.
Oh, the way, yeah.
It's a good idea to do it in the way
you did it, yeah.
Oh, I love that she didn't want the maid. I think that's a really nice touch, because I think that's also something that I grew up in Jersey, so watching that, you can sort of relate to these people moving to this place and the mother not wanting that. You know what I mean? Because she's not accustomed to that, being from Minnesota. So I think that's one of the ways it helped bridge the gap from this being an LA show to a show about really that could be, anybody can sort of understand and relate to what was going on in Beverly Hills.
Cindy represented the, what are we doing here, this awful place? That was her voice in the beginning, and I'm only here because of my wife.
Yeah, and then you get just intoxicated by the storylines and the things that are happening once you get in there and you meet Brandon and Brenda. I want to go back to the guest star note that Aaron Spelling had. It is true, though, in Aaron's notes that Noelle does have a very big role in this. I think that's a fair note that he gave, that you're focusing on a guest star. Why is that? And was it because you're still trying to find these characters, and bringing on another character will sort of help to learn about the history of these other characters, the ones that we're focusing on, like Kelly's friend and all this kind of stuff? Is that why you guys sort of did that?
I think I'm probably, in terms of the actual how much time was in there, was probably I was writing it like I would have written it if it were a movie. It's just she had a role. She was like the main guest star in it. At the end it's the person who became the recurring, although I always thought you could have. And then
I remember there was some talk of that at some point.
That is right, but you went off to do that big TV movie, and you were in a different strata. we couldn't bring you back.
There was some maybe
no, you were great. You were great. You really represented. In the pilot, Amy and I had nothing to do in the pilot, but there was one actress there who was in the pilot. And actually is my favorite part of the pilot is this actress named Leslie Bega played the rich girl, Mary Ann, up on the top of the hill. Yeah, I wouldn't know either, Amy, but I saw the pilot. Totally. And you filled that role. I mean, you could have been that girl, and there was so much to do. Amy, we're not going to drop names here because it won't mean anything to anybody but she and I. There was one girl who was in Amy's class in high school whose house was a party house. Mm-hmm. And I think that had some of the
Yeah.
that you base some of this on, and it was
sort of a compilation of a few of them. But no one really understands this, but I grew up in Beverly Hills. If you know LA, south of between Olympic and Pico, and they literally called that below the tracks. It was like you'd see this as a normal house in any town, and nice, but nothing fancy at all. But once we became exposed, my girlfriend and I used to ride our bikes up north there were railroad tracks on Santa Monica Boulevard. And some of the girls we met were they were like that character. That's all. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And it was just this, whoa, it was just, and so there was some of that. And also my closest friend, who's still a very, very, like a sister to me, her family moved from Ohio here, and her mom was I borrowed from her mom, who was fantastic and just didn't understand all the materialism and all that, and sort of
that's interesting.
Environmentalist. Yeah.
Is the person you're talking about the one I would think you'd be talking about?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm pretty sure. So the other thing I wanted to say is that when I rewatched it, because my daughters loved Shannon Doherty and loved her in this and in Charmed, and she was actually in Girls Just Want to Have Fun and named after my niece. I named the boy and girl in that after my niece and nephew, and so I had known her before a little bit, but I thought she was so good in this episode.
So good.
And her relationship with your Tiffany character I just thought it was really real. And so I guess this is a long-winded answer, Pete, that I just thought it was a really good story to play off against the others.
I mean, I love it too. And I think that's one of the things that's endearing about 90210. I just watched the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air reunion, but it's always focused on those guys, the main cast, but there's so many of the guest stars that made such an impact on 90210. I mean, I think, Chuck, it's fair to say from doing this podcast that the fans love the guest stars that took on these big roles. And
my mind. It blew my mind in the beginning when we had some of these people who had recurring character and everybody wanted, and that our fans, and God bless you all who are looking at this, they know every line of every episode. They know what music the network has stripped from us. They know the spelling company, CBS, I should say, and everything else. It's really they keep us on our toes in that regard.
One of my closest friends, like when I was telling him, they've been trying to get me to, trying to get in touch with me to do this podcast, he was like, wait a minute, I listened to that podcast. I love that podcast. And I was like, really? Like, oh my God, yeah.
Well, my goal, and I've said this to Amy when I said, my goal is to make Pete laugh about 4 times during the
it works.
There you go.
And I got him there every week. That's number 4. That's good.
He was doing this. I thought, what a great thing to do during COVID, an antidote and a healthy thing to do. I have obviously I haven't been to the hairdresser lately in like 9 months, but I used to have somebody who would occasionally cut my hair when I wanted it to look good. And he does like all these, people that are, goes to their houses. He's whatever they are. They're people of influence, makers or whatever they are. Mm-hmm. And Hollywood people. And something came up, and I never bring this up. And then finally he said, you worked on 90210? And I said, yeah. He goes, that show changed my life. And he grew up in a very poor area. People were in gangs, and he just thought it gave him that there was a world outside. I couldn't believe the story. I couldn't believe that it would reach people, like such a broad, that made me feel really good.
It was so loved. This show was so loved, and people were, we used to gather. I had like a group of friends that we used to gather, and like make dinner and watch, 90210 and Melrose Place. It was like a part of the zeitgeist of like the time, the era that it was on. It was hugely. It was just, there was something about it. It was like, our show, our the people of that age really got something out of it,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There was something about it that, you know, it lightened. It had such levity that it was like, okay.
And heart. That's what we always talk about here. Noelle, did you get recognized a bit from this?
At the time, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Right. It was a new show, but I'm sure somebody has come to you and said, "Where are you in 90210?" Has that happened to you?
Yes, it has happened to me. Yes, it has happened to me. Definitely.
We're not the same. See, Pete, you expecting, and what we usually hear is, "Oh yeah," but at that point, we didn't. One of the things and I think it's an appropriate story to say about this particular episode, you know, we were so down on the totem pole in terms of promotion. We were the lowest license fee. We had all these things, and I felt that if we did something really wrong, and what would be wrong would be go over budget. So I was and partially because the way the original contract was put together by the spelling company, after the 14th hour, from the 12th, Amy, can you believe that a non-union company agreed to this? After the 12th hour to the 14th hour, they didn't get overtime. Overtime only kicked in at the 14th hour. Right. Because we couldn't afford that. And we figured we'd be going 12 and a half hours. So we said, can you please help us? And we'll give you a huge jump if we go over 14 hours. So I got a call that we are not going to make the day. And I said, no, we are going to make the day. And I drove out there. And Amy, I actually did this. It was the most probably intrusive thing I did on all 143 episodes. And so when you guys watch it again, realize this. The stuff where any scene, and I don't know if it was one scene or two scenes, but I think the major scene that Brenda did in her bedroom, everything is one take.
Do you mean which one, the stealing or the first scene in the thing with Brandon?
I think it's the first. I think it was the stealing part. I think it was and it may have been the other. That I don't remember so much, Amy, but I do remember I'm in the room and and the DP was a wonderfully artistic guy, but he was a little slow, named David Geddes from Canada. He's had a great career. And I would say to him, we do one take. It would look okay to me. I turn to him and I say, did you get it? Was there dirt in the camera? No. Moving on. And we got about 2 pages in about less than an hour.
Wasn't that was the scene where she brings me home, wasn't it?
If you remember me on the set doing that, then yes, that was the scene.
I kind of do remember because she brings me home and we're in her room and I hide the bag for
right.
Yeah, that exactly. So it was interesting. I mean, it was me being so over my head, but at the same time, oddly enough, particularly in that first thing, particularly with the crew, they went, this is the guy who's in charge. And it was very hard in that beginning, because we had 2 production companies. We had we're a new show. It's a bottom network. And it was a big thing. But it was because of paranoid that Duke Vincent was going to yell at me and fire me. I thought I would be fired. I used to have a little Post-its were brand new at the time. And Amy, you remember that big office they gave us on Wilshire Boulevard?
Yeah.
And when anybody would call, I would have to take a business-oriented call. So the writers would be in the room, Darren and Amy and the others would be in the room, and I would turn my back. And on this little Post-it, I wrote, DFU, don't fuck up. just get through it, And fortunately, it worked. It was, and to know that we bring so much pleasure to so many people around the world is really the justification for it all, I guess.
Yes, for sure.
And people remember it. Like someone smashed into my car at LAX, and my insurance adjuster, I said something, and I said, well, it's blah, blah, blah. My writing is impacted. And he said, I took the liberty of looking you up on IMDb and I'm on Google, and you did those shows, Melrose Place and 902. They were just these obscure, I'm sure, Chuck, you get this all the time. And And Noelle, you might get it. It's interesting. The other thing I wanted to say is a shout out to the director, because I forgot, I loved how she shot the first scene.
Well, is it Bethany?
No, it was
Caitlin something,
It was Caitlin, yes.
Caitlin Adams was her name. She went to Beverly Hills High School.
Yes.
She had a different name, Nira Bira. She was in the 2 years ahead of me. And the reason that she directed it is because, we were, I was a big fan of everything that 30-something did. And, both production-wise, the intelligence of the scripts, it was always such a prestigious show, never that highly rated show, but I wasn't thinking about things like that at that point. And I had seen something directed by Melanie Mayron would do some of their episodes, and she's a terrific director. And I, reached out, called her and she was very flattered, but she said no. And she said, Melanie said no, but she said, but you should interview my partner, who's a director.
And 30-something. I had a whole storyline with Melanie Mayron, and I feel like Caitlin was also maybe the director of that one episode.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it wasn't her. And what Amy is saying is exactly right. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, here I am working for the spelling company, which at that point, even though they wanted things to be, more hip and more like the line production company propaganda.
Oh, that's right.
It was still the spelling. Now, the spelling company aesthetically was always the establishing shot, the over-the-shoulder shot, the close-up, and that kind of thing. So that was their expectation. And the younger directors that we were bringing in, newer directors, both on the green room, this one, the first time and one-on-one, Bethany Rooney being one of those 4 directors, who's gone on to have a 30-year career. She, but Caitlin brought so much camera movement and interesting shots to it. And again, it was maybe the network executive liked it, but the powers that be upstairs, and that was, they wanted it more traditional. And by the time I left after 5 seasons, they got what they wanted. Instead of,
Yeah, I mean, it was a real journey, because I think the first few were really they really deepened the characters, in a way that's what should happen at the beginning. And there was so much freedom.
Yeah. Noelle, I wanted to ask you about working with some of the cast. You mentioned, they were all super young. You did a lot with Shannon on screen. What was that like?
It was lots of fun. I remember being very, feeling very grateful that she was very welcoming to me, and she seemed to like me. And so, we were eating lunch together and we were talking, and that way I think it really it translated on screen. And I remember, Luke Perry was, trying to get me to come in his trailer and run lines. And, it was just a very funny, I was like, that's okay. You come out here. We can run lines out here, I was like, let's go sit at the lunch table and run lines.
Right.
And I think there was just this, it was really, it was very, I just remember it being a great experience. I remember it being, there being like some tension, but I wasn't aware of a lot of it. There was a little bit of the, who was the important character, which actor felt that their character was more important. But I think like Amy said, it was, because it was so early in the series, you were learning who these characters were,
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we knew you have a Brandon episode, you have a Brenda episode, you have a Brandon episode, you have a Brandon. We went back and forth that way mostly. Mm-hmm. When we got to the 6th episode called Perfect Mom, all of us that Darren Star wrote, all of a sudden he wrote a great part for Jenny Garth.
Kelly.
and made her more of the focus than
the Walshes.
And that was. You think there was tension in episode 2? You should have come back for episode 3.
Yeah, the other thing is that I think that it's interesting what you say also, because I was also at the beginning of Melrose Place. Mm-hmm. And it's very different in the sense that they had the 90210 thing having become a breakout show. Mm-hmm. And so they went in there thinking that was happening. Whereas the actors went into 90210 kind of like, okay, wow, who knows if this is going to go past.
What's my next job? That's what they
That's exactly what it was like. I mean, it really was like, it was the beginning. And like Charles said, who knew if it was going to go beyond 6 episodes? So it was just sort of everybody's job at the time. And I really remember there being like an ease, about around the whole set, and it's funny listening to Charles talk about the pressure that he was under, especially from like, Aaron's, the Spelling Company was so sort of old school TV.
That's right.
And, had these staid ideas of how it should be, just really, like you said, like, then there's the far away shot, then there's the over the shoulder, then there's the close up. Like there was a way that it was done, I guess in the 70s and 80s, that was very different. But this seemed like it seemed like there was a lot of freedom on the set for the actors. That's what it seemed like for us.
Yeah, interesting.
As Amy says, we didn't really know, and the truth is also, to follow what Amy said so right, is that we changed. And Sandy Grushow, we just had a conversation with him recently, and he also pointed this out. They got to the episode 8. What Amy's talking about, the one where it focused on Carol Potter, Cindy, the mother. After that, they said, don't do that again. And we had the rest, but they had paid to episode 12. And from episode 8 to episode 14, and episode 13 and 14, by the way, after a while, they would only pay for like 2 scripts, 1 episode. They weren't giving us full orders. They were ribbing and drabbing because we weren't that big. We weren't doing very much business for them at that point. But nonetheless, they at that point, episode 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, which was, Amy, the one where Brenda Teen-Line, isn't it, Rum AIDS episode, Brandon cracks his car, you do the falling out of the plane, and Kristen Dattilo with the baby, and then Slumber Party.
Darren and I did it together.
They left us alone. You and Darren did that together. Left us alone. And then there was East Side Story, one that was part of that group. And then we did one down in Palm Springs where Dylan and Brenda almost, and the war ends, Gulf War, ratings are back. We go down to Palm Springs, see that our ratings are rising, and the episode we have showing is Brenda and Dylan go to Palm Springs with the intention of sleeping with each other. And that's when the sales department of Fox got interested in our show. You're doing this, and then you're giving them this. What sponsors are going to do that? That changed the tone a little bit.
Interesting.
And also, when the shows were at the very beginning, they couldn't decide. When I first started working there, they couldn't decide on the title, and it really was about like, what is the show about? Is the show about the family? Is the show really about a family show about the parents? Is it about that house is a family for all these misfits and people who don't have homes in Beverly Hills? And
Amy, for my crowd, that was the Halpin house.
Was it?
Halpin? Oh yeah, all of us, Robert Ziegler, Philip Elway, all of those, Larry Kaplan, we hung out at Halpin's house. Even though he was a grade above us, he was our buddy, and the parents. And so the design of the Walsh house is the design of their house.
And that was south of the tracks too. I'd like to add that house.
Well, Amy, I don't know if you know the story, but we're here. I'm going to tell it like really quick. So the original story title was The Class of Beverly Hills. And I love that title because, as Amy said, there was railroad tracks went right through the city. that
Wait, hold
defined.
on. You cut out. You cut out, Chuck. You cut out.
Oh, okay. Am I back?
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead.
I think that was a Barry Diller title, by the way, when Darren wrote the pilot. I think that was an original.
Class of Beverly Hills too.
Maybe not. Maybe it was after that. I don't know.
That was the title. And we're going forward. And then Aaron Spelling calls me, and we've been working on the show. We've been talking about it, who's what, where it is. And he calls me up and says, Barry Diller now is changing the title. He wants it to be 90210. And my response was, no, it's 90212. They live south of Wilshire. and he said, no, it's 90210. And my contribution was, I understood immediately what it was. I kind of liked it. My other writing producers and everybody hated it. And
I liked it. I thought it was great
too. I think, yeah, we got it
because I like 30-something too.
And it was different. It was a different title. And all I said was, say Beverly Hills 90210, because Beverly Hills is the draw.
Right.
And Barry, Mr. Diller actually went to Beverly Hills High School too, so he jumped on that, and that's Aaron and him, and the rest is in the books.
Amy, I don't know if you answered this, but with the shoplifting storyline, was that an experience that you had, or? I had
a lot of, let's just say I had a lot of friends who, when we became friendly with these kids who had so much money, and it was part of what they did. And we were very like, what? And sort of mixed, but we were like Brenda, kind of, honestly. And I even have a girlfriend who was from south of the tracks, and she went one day in one of those expeditions, and she had read some Nancy Drew or some books where they got caught and that they were talking, and that someone was listening, it was being taped or listened to. So she said, so they said, oh, they did this whole thing. And then, it worked out fine. And then it just was part of the culture of the more wealthy, the bigger houses that were basically unchaperoned, no parents there. And in that era that, But
and what Amy's describing with the shoplifting, look, my wife is just a couple of years younger than both of us, and that she tells her stories about it being in Bloomingdale's, where girls who could easily afford stuff would try to walk out with a sweater and whatever. And I think she did once and was so nervous she never did it again.
Yeah, you feel really guilty, and it's ridiculous. And I have the line in that she could never wear it. But right. That was supposed to be that she felt too bad about it. I don't know if that, I think something maybe got cut, but that was like that about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something about it that where, somebody who can have anything they want, and what they want is attention, really.
Right.
So it's like this, and it's this thrill of, or even this attempt to get caught, to sort of like, how far can I go before somebody's gonna stop, before somebody's gonna show up and be a parent or something to me.
I'm curious, Noelle, did you, when you read the script and you saw the shoplifting thing, did you relate to that at all in any way? I mean, I'm not sure. You're from.
What do you say?
No, I'm not asking you if you shoplifted, but did you know?
Yeah,
experiences like that. Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's funny, as we've been talking about this. When I first came to Los Angeles, I grew up in Manhattan, and I lived in Hell's Kitchen, and I went to public schools. I went to the High School of Performing Arts, and then I came to LA. I was about 17, 18 when I came to LA. I was sort of like back and forth a lot, and at that time, I became really close with an actress named Trisha Lee Fisher and her sister Jolie Fisher, who are Connie Fisher and Eddie Fisher's children. And I became very close with Trisha. Became like my other half, and her and I were very close for a while. And I lived in their house, this big, beautiful house in Beverly Hills, up Coldwater Canyon, and on Delfern. And Connie was there, and she was very much the mother to them. But then like there was times where it was just us. It was just the girls there, and of course we were old enough to be living there, but it was for me a very, I did not grow up in Hollywood by any means. So this whole, it's very similar, where of the character, like I was sort of like, the Brenda character,
right.
and and then the other thing that, and the question you asked, when I was in, this actually is weird that I just realized this as Amy was talking, but when I lived alone in an apartment in Manhattan Plaza in New York City. When I was 14, my mother was an actress, and she got a job, and she got a bus and truck of Brighton Beach Memoirs. And it was a big job for my mother, who was an actress who didn't really have that much success. And she went on this national tour and then the bus and truck. So she was gone for 2.5 years. So I actually did live alone in the apartment in Hell's Kitchen from 14 to 17. So for me, that was the affinity of the character, was I had so much bravado as a teenager, and nobody could know that I was living alone. School didn't know. And, and there was a lot of, for me in that character, that was the thing that I had the affinity with, not so much the
shoplifting. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a really big thing, this abandonment or feeling, like that feeling and when you're a teenager and with your mom and stuff. I thought the scene, by the way, where you came up to Shannon, at her, I guess, in between classes and said, "Come with us," and the way you did it and you put your arm around her, I just thought it was so great. And
yeah, acceptance. Exactly. You're in the teen club now.
Yeah.
I also think the scene that you and Carol have at the end of this is really, really unbelievably great. I mean, the stuff that you guys did together, such beautiful work there, Noelle. Do you remember doing that and shooting that with Carol?
I do. I remember it very well. I really do. I remember it especially because she was a very good actress, and I kind of, I didn't grow up doing television. I grew up doing like off Broadway in Manhattan and just I did a lot of theater as a young, as a kid. And so for me, there was a difference between acting with, Shannon and Luke and Jason. Like there was like this kind of kidness about it. But when I did that scene with her, it was really, grounding for me, because I felt like she gave me so much to work off of. And that was really, it was really rich for me, and I think a lot, and this happened to me a lot when I was an actress. Like, I think when you're acting, when you're working a lot, you're just, okay, I'm doing this show, I'm, this script, and on this day I'm learning my lines, and you almost don't feel the gravity necessarily always of your character, or don't have time to, do the kind of, method acting or work that you would on a script. And I remember being in that house and filming that scene and being like, oh, this has such gravity. This is like much more important than I realized, like this character, and this interaction, it was very powerful. I thought she was great to work with. She was really sweet.
I thought the dynamic between the two of you was really, really good too. And I forgot how good that dynamic was. I thought those were her scenes with you, and with Shannon were great, but that scene with you at the end, also the scene, I guess it's the bikini scene. Is that where you talk about the Trump lawyer? Yeah. Okay, so that line, I wrote it like, I remember, the one thing I remember about writing the script is I wrote that about 2 a.m, after it just, like, I didn't plan it. It just totally came out. And I thought, That is so cool that that line came out, and I never had intended that that would be part of the scene, but you did it so beautifully too.
Oh, thank you. I was so scared because I was like, how do you say this? Am I going to say it right? I don't speak French. Oh my God. I was asking everybody, how do you say this word?
But like you were one of these kids that would have gone and would have gone on one of these trips to Europe and would know the fact that you did remember it made you have so much more depth the way you said it too. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is really great, guys. This is good chat. I think we covered everything. Amy, I love having you here and adding your insight. There's definitely some more episodes we'd love to jump in with you down the line. So there's some really great stuff. This stuff
we'll definitely do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Noelle, it's great seeing you again. It's been a blast getting to know you briefly.
Are you in LA or are you back east?
No, I'm back east. I live in on the east end of Long Island. I'm in Sag Harbor now.
Nice.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Love it.
A little you much different than where you grew up and when you grew up in Hell's Kitchen, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I go back and forth to the city, but yeah, I'm out here. Yep.
Nice. All right, guys. Thanks so much for this. And we will all be in touch. All right.
Thank you. Amy, great to see you. Give my best to Gary.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Nice to see everyone. And thank you, Chuck.